Todas están pendientes de ti, pero tú puesta para mí, haciendo que me odien más, porque todos te quieren probar lo que no saben.
Hey guys, thank you for coming out tonight. My name is Bobby. I'm actually the founder of Sats.B Toronto. Thank you for coming out on a Wednesday evening. We promise you this event is going to be very thought-provoking because we thought we'd kind of turn the tides a little bit and bring you something a little more informative versus a whole mingling, networking, drinking, and then taking an Uber back and throwing up. But no, maybe not throwing up. But anyways, I just kind of want to just give a quick shout out to a few people before we get started. Number one, thank you to both Hamza and Jessie for coming out tonight, and give them a round of applause. We know that these two people have a big wealth of knowledge behind them, and we're here to enforce the message behind helping you become a better professional. And trust me, we promise you, you're going to get your worthwhile out of this. Also, the very handsome Sats.B as your host. Give him a round of applause. We also want to recognize a few key people who are a big part of the event. Number one, Daisy Fest, so Sats.B, give him a round of applause again. We also have Susan, our event planner, for Beautiful Beginnings. Also our sponsor as well. So we have UL Lawyers. Unfortunately, he did not make it out tonight. He's actually on vacation again, but so it's all good. We also have Anita Parmar. She's actually, the story behind Anita and I is that she's actually Sats.B Toronto's first lady. And we're blessed to have her back on board as a sponsor. She's been a big part of Sats.B since day one. So, and to day infinity. So give her a round of applause as well. This fine gentleman right here at the camera is Flashing Lights Photography. So he's going to be making you look all great tonight. So yeah, but thank you very much for coming out. And the guy outside on the turntable, DJ Vicious, unfortunately he's not allowed inside, but give him a round of applause anyway. And we're going to get started.
Thank you, Bobby. Now, you guys, please give yourself a big round of applause. It's a Wednesday night, and it's not the best traffic out there from what I hear. So if anybody drove in, Ubered in, thank you very much. So my name is Satish Bala, aka Sats.B. The topic is really interesting as it goes away because the TV is burnt out. No, I'm just kidding. We'll figure it out in a second. Welcome to the Thompson, guys, where things work sometimes, and sometimes it just doesn't. So anyhow, I've been a serial entrepreneur. I didn't even know what that word meant. I was 18. I was in third year university, and for the very first time I realized GPA scores matter, and I didn't know it did, because I thought if I got a 51, I would still get a computer science degree. And then I went into this panic mode, trying to figure out how am I actually going to now make a living? Nobody will hire me. And that, weird stress moment with a South Indian family that already thought I was a loser and wasn't going to do much in life. It was just a lot of stress. So I did two things. One, I said, well, I got other skills. I was a pretty good basketball player. I was DJing. I was MCing. And the other 219 kids in my class were super introvert computer techies. So I was like, good, I can meet people and make eye contact, shake hands, and sort of be out there. So how do I take advantage of that? And number two, this thing called internet was starting to happen. We're talking, a while ago. I won't tell you how old I am, even though you can check my Facebook. Early black and white stuff. So I said, you know what, let me just go out and start networking with local businesses in the Toronto scene and just convince them that this thing called the web is happening. You need to get on it. Phone books are gonna die. And a lot of them bought into it. I started to build a client base, but instead of taking money, I would give them a list of my other classmates, 219 names, and say, look, you can hire anybody you want, but if you want to hire these people, they suck, I'm the best in class, hire me first. And that was my sales pitch. And people laughed at it, but they ended up working with me, and by the time I graduated, this was 1999, I had a successful consulting company making just under $500,000. And back then, like when beer is $1.50 at clubs, that's a lot of money for a young man. And my parents thought I was dealing drugs. It doesn't make sense. You're graduating, we have a company already. But that started a cycle of building business and selling business over the last 20 years. And this idea of burnout and mental health wasn't really around. You know, people will tell you to just suck it up. This is what business is like, or, you know, have a drink and it'll be okay. And you realize later on in life that there's a lot of things that we're not taught in school. How to deal with burnouts, how to handle rejection, how to handle the low moments in life. Because it's easy to be happy when you're successful and you're at the top of the tide, right? But once it gets to the other side, we don't have a rule book or a playbook. And that's what today's series is about. You know, as you guys have all been to something before, we've always focused on entertainment and networking. And as we get into the next phase of this organization, we want to focus on how do we share insights, value, education, which is as important as networking is. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our two amazing speakers. I wrote it down so I don't forget anything, so forgive me that I'm staring at my phone. First up, Jessie over there. Her bio reads, chocolate lover, she confirmed, 2 chocolate chips at least every night. She's a Bollywood dancer, she's a Bhangra enthusiast, and of course a mental health advocate. She studied psychology at Queen's, and now, or was working with Jack, and is going on to her own thing. And in her spare time, and I don't think it's a spare time, she started something called the Mental Health Spotlight. And that's really put her on the map as she opened up her own story to give other people permission to share their story, which is a very powerful way to engage with people. So please help me bring to the front Jessie Brar. This young man, I met him at a podcast about a month and a half ago. It blew me away. He's an amazing speaker, super smart. He's a multi-award winning marketer and entrepreneur. He's a managing director of Student Life Network, Canada's most comprehensive resource hub dedicated to helping and empowering millions of students across the country. He co-founded both Splash Effect, a boutique marketing creative agency, as well as Skills Camp, a soft skill training company. He's also the author of an incredible book, Amazon best-selling book, The Burnout Gamble, which is in front of us. We've got a couple of copies for you guys. And he's just a fantastic speaker, super passionate. So we're extremely delighted to have Hamza also today. Please, come on up. So we don't want this to be sort of us talking for 30 minutes and you guys watching and nodding and then getting out to drink. We want it to be interactive. I've got a bunch of questions, but at any point something triggers you and you have to get this burning question out of your soul, feel free to interrupt because we want to make this a bit more interactive. Before I get started, how many people here own your own business? Okay, how many people here work for somebody? How many people here were switch sides if possible? Okay, good. So to kick it off with you guys, I know I did a very top-line intro, but with the topic of burnout and mental health, maybe we'll start with you because you've got a fantastic moment of clarity that sort of got you on this path. But can you give us a quick intro into that moment where you decided, okay, I have a story that I think others need to hear, and what is that?
For sure. So, hi, my name's Jessie. Growing up, I always struggled with my mental health. So I think it started when I was about 8 years old, and I had no idea what that meant. I just knew I was different. So I remember, like, my most distinct memory is like Canada Day when all the kids are like, oh my God, fireworks. I was like, oh my God, fireworks. And my mom was always like, what are you doing? I'm like, I don't know. And so growing up, I'm also the oldest of 3, and my mom's a single mother, so I felt a lot of responsibility to just step up and like help out whenever I could. And when I was 16, I went to a psych class in high school. It was just a class I had to take to pass my degree. And I remember they were listing off the symptoms of depression and anxiety, and I'm sitting there like, oh, cool, this has a name. That's awesome. And I went home to my mom, and I was like, Mom, I think I'm depressed. And she's like, are you sure? I'm like, yeah. I'm like, I don't know. I just think I'm depressed. She's like, you have literally straight A's. She's like, you're top of your class. Your family loves you. I literally give you all the freedom in the world. Like, what are you depressed about? And I sat there and I was like, I don't know. I guess nothing. And we just kind of brushed it aside and went on with life. And things as they were. And then when I went to university, I moved away from home, didn't have my family around, which was always a big part of my support system. And I started to struggle a lot more. First year was really, really hard for me, to the verge of like, I was at like a rock bottom, like could have died kind of situation. And I came home and things started to feel a little better, but then when I had to go back to school, I was like, I don't know how I can live my life like this anymore. And what made the biggest difference for me was I stumbled into this presentation, and it was a South Asian male who was talking, and he was talking about mental health and how he had struggled and what he'd been through. And for the first time, I felt like I could relate to someone. For the first time, I didn't feel so alone, and that changed everything for me. So I remember sitting there and be like, if he can do it, if he can get help, maybe I can too. So the next day, I booked an appointment with a therapist. That didn't work. Tried medication, tried a bunch of things until finally found what worked for me. And I remember just sitting there and thinking, I started getting involved with other organizations, and I remember sitting there thinking it made the biggest difference to see myself represented and to see someone who looked like me have that conversation. And so I was like, you know what, let me just throw my story out there. I don't think my story's unique in any way. It's not super interesting. It's my story's whatever it is. But for me, it made that difference. And I was like, maybe there's someone out there who's gonna see that and say, you know what, me too. And so from there, I started inviting other people to share their story, and I created the Mental Health Spotlight. So really it was just a community space for people to speak up, for us to share information, have these conversations, because there was nowhere else to have them before. And here we are today. So, yeah.
Thank you. And first of all, thank you to the organizers. Thank you to Jessie. Thank you to all of you for being here. This is really awesome. I think this is a conversation that I wish happened a long, long, long time ago. And I want to take some themes from Jessie's story. She touched upon representation and seeing other people who had gone through similar struggles and then creating a movement as a result. I want to invert that story a little bit and tell you about a time where I leaned into being lonely when it came to my mental health. So I think the year was 2007, and I got an internship at Sony Music Entertainment. Now picture this, a young kid from Scarborough, son of South Asian immigrant parents, a little Muslim kid growing up, suddenly gets this beautiful internship at Sony Music. Like, what, you want me? This is awesome. I didn't believe it when I got the internship offer. And I jumped on that and I said, I'm gonna make the most of it. I'm gonna squeeze every last drop of orange juice from this orange that I can. And I threw myself at the opportunity. I felt extremely grateful to be there. I would work 24 hours straight, 48 hours straight. And in one particular stretch, I worked 72 hours straight. Let me describe what this day would look like. I would start in the morning, I would go to the internship, I would clock in easily 8 to 9 hours at the internship. Then I would go back home, I would work, I would take a rest on the 38 Highland Creek on the way back home. That was my only time to take a nap. I would do a little bit of reading when I could. I would work another job that I had at Sears at the time. I would help out my dad with his business, and then I would go back out at night to be at shows. And you know the industry, right? Like, you've got the management during the day, the promotion during the day, and at night you actually have to be at the shows. But again, here I was, overachiever. I had to help with the setup, the teardown, come back home and do it all over again.
Just on that quick point, even though he's speaking today, he showed up at 5 to help set up.
Doesn't leave, right? It just stays with you, these habits. And that's an interesting point. So because I'm a first-generation student, so is anyone here in the room a first-generation student? You're the first person in your family to go to post-secondary? Right, that was me. And so I had a very sort of one-dimensional blueprint for success. I got to watch my parents equate hard work with success. That was the equation that was given to me. You work hard, that's how you succeed. And so I knew no other way other than brute force application at what I was doing to get the results that I wanted. So I told my boss, Simon, I'm like, Simon, I'm gonna do whatever you want, whatever you need. I basically became SpongeBob. I was like, yeah, you know, I'll show up at this event, no problem, I got this, yeah, just bouncing around all the time. And then it bit me in the ass, because towards the end of my year-long internship there, after a 72-hour stretch, the night it happened, we did a concert for this band called The Priests, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's 3 priests. And we did a concert for them. I came to work the next morning. I sat down on my computer, and I was just bleary-eyed. I couldn't see anything. I was just all foggy. I started to feel nauseous. Things started to turn orange for some reason, orange and red. I got up. I stumbled all the way to the bathroom. I could barely find my way there. And instead of going to the public bathroom, I went to the handicap stall because I could lock the door behind me. I locked the door. I looked at myself in the mirror, and I could just see a shell of myself, just sallowed eyes, just a sunken face, just extremely exhausted. I just remembered the beginning of throwing up, and then I blacked out. How I woke up was to rambunctious knocks at the door, violent knocks at the door, and this probably happened 10 or 11 hours later. And I knew this because I looked at my phone and I had gotten war dialed by everyone I knew. My mom, my dad, my girlfriend at the time, my boss. Hamza, what's going on? They're texting me, they're calling me, I hadn't picked up. My body naturally recovered, or tried to recover, from that episode of 72 hours of straight overwork in that 10 to 11 period where I was, 10 to 11 hour period where I was passed out on the floor of Sony Music's handicap stall bathroom covered in my own puke. Now, what I should have done in this case is I should have gone and told somebody. I should have told my boss about it. I should have gone and seen a doctor. I should have told my family, my friends. But you know what I did? I said, this is embarrassing. I can't let anyone know about this because if they find out about this, they're not going to hire me. They're not going to think I'm valuable anymore. And Jessie and I were talking about this right before. So much of, especially being in the South Asian community, we equate our value, our self-worth, our feelings of being enough with economic industriousness, with being productive, with being valuable to the market. And I taught myself that, or I told myself that, if anyone finds out about this, it's going to be the end of your career. So I sucked it up and I carried on with my life. And burnout happened again, and we'll probably get into that story at another point.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of us can relate, right? Whether you're from a South Asian background or you're not, there's this online conversation that says success means you gotta just work, work, work. If you have a 9 to 5 and you don't have a side hustle, what's wrong with you? If you have a side hustle and you don't have 10 of them, what's wrong with you? You take weekends off, what's wrong with you? And eventually, when burnout happens, they continue with that same drama. So, you know, from your perspectives, and thank you so much for sharing your personal story, how do you define mental health, or even the idea of burnout, from the context of like a cultural noise that says, do more now because this is the time, and hustle? And, you know, we all know the culprits, the Gary V's of the world. They literally yell at you through Instagram, right? If you don't go to every garage sale every Saturday, Sunday, and turn $1 into $20, you're a loser. I mean, that's what we're hearing. And so, you know, what is that like from a mainstream perspective? And then before Gary Vee, there was my dad, who was my Gary Vee, like literally yelling at me every single day because they don't understand what the hell we're doing. So what are some of the things that, you know, as you went through your journey that started to give you like this cultural sort of milestones to be like, okay, now it feels like a milestone. I got to stop, slow down. And if I can't slow down, how do I talk back?
Okay, to reframe the question, it's just basically like, what is burnout in a mental health context? And how do you come over it?
Yeah, and how do you start to talk about it?
Cool, so I'm like the queen of burnout. I was probably the king after that story. I'm that person who, I have my 9 to 5, I have 6 side hustles, I'm always on the go. If you look at my like calendar, you're probably gonna puke. And for me, that was the same thing where I'm like, if you work hard, you'll get to where you wanna go. And it was a similar experience where I was like, you know what, if I don't stop, like I'm gonna stop, like I'm just gonna die. And like burnout isn't just a mental thing, it's physical. Like it takes that toll on you, and you have to realize, you have to just switch your mind frame. For me, it was figuring out, like in the South Asian culture, in our community, a lot of it is you live for other people. You're always doing what you can so like your kids can have a better life, so you can take care of your parents or whatever, and you never stop to think about yourself. And that's still my mindset, but I had to reframe it where I'm like, you know what, if I want to take care of my parents, if I want to take care of my future generation, my children, all of that, I need to make sure I take care of myself first. Right. Because if I don't take care of myself, I can't take care of the people around me. Like I'm not gonna have that time, that energy. And so I started even like scheduling in those breaks. So I went and I had like a really crazy week in New York where I was working nonstop for 5 days. And then I was like, you know what, this weekend I'm canceling everything, like no friends, nothing. I'm like, I'm gonna sit in my bed. And it was so hard. It was really, really hard to just sit there in my bed and watch Netflix. Like that's not something I do. I like was texting all my friends. I'm like, guys, I'm so bored. Like, I wanna go do things. And then I have those friends who hold me accountable to doing nothing. And they're like, just sit in your bed, take a nap, watch another TV show. And I'm like, okay, cool. Like you have to, eat your cookies. You have to schedule that in, because if you are like, a lot of us, like if you are an entrepreneur, there's always something you could be doing. And so it's harder almost to take that break. And so if you make it like a scheduled thing, be like, this is a thing I need to do at this time every single day, I think that kind of like helps with the burnout.
I can offer a little bit of a related perspective to that. So I grew up in a priority neighborhood here in the GTA. I grew up in Malvern specifically, in a street called Robinstown. Immigrant haven over there, a lot of poverty over there, a lot of undiagnosed, untreated mental health issues over there looking back. It was really scary because for most of my life, I believed that this was normal. This is how people acted. People just lashed out. People were always sad and they were moody and whatnot. And, I thought that this was normal for a very, very long time, almost to an unhealthy degree. My mom, I would say, has been depressed for most of her life. And my sister is a registered nurse. I have burned out multiple times. I've talked to all the specialists that I could possibly talk to. I've done all the research that I can. I've compiled all that research in the book that you can see over there. Both my sister and I have sat down with my mom on multiple occasions and said, hey, we will pay for your therapy. Like, we will take you there. Don't worry about it. You have to go get seen by a therapist. My mom refuses to go. It's one of my biggest failures in life, that I'm able to build companies, write books, speak around the world, but I can't get my mom to get in the car, go see a therapist. Why? Because in her words, there's no such thing as mental health. Can you believe that? There's no such thing as mental health. The irony is that my mom will get a small scratch on her foot and she will be at Dr. Wasim Ali the next day, right? My mom has no belief whatsoever that mental weakness can lead to mental illness. And maybe I shouldn't phrase it that way because I don't know if necessarily there is a distinguishment between the two of them. But my mom believes, and she's told me my entire life, my sister, like, hey, if you're depressed, if you're anxious, that's nothing. Just pray it's going to be okay. Just suck it up. Toughen up. You're going to be all right. God takes care of everything. And it's been very devastating to watch. And I actually have no solution for that. And I think, in talking to my sister recently, she said that we just have to phase that generation out. And that breaks my heart because I feel like, again, when I go back to the first thing I said when I opened this conversation, when I answered the first question, is I wish this happened a long time ago, not just for our generation, but for my parents' generation as well.
I think to stay on that, and I want to get into your book a little bit, let's unpack a little bit, because I was sort of like your mom, thinking, well, mental health is an entrepreneur thing, right? Because I'm starting businesses and I'm under pressure, there's economic issues, there's culture issues, there's customer issues, and it's an entrepreneur thing. If you're 9 to 5, man, you got to set that. You go to work, you have lunch, you get your 15-minute breaks, and it was only in the last couple of years as I started paying attention to the category and the stories that came out that I started to identify my own symptoms. And media does a lot of times only talk about the most extreme cases of mental health. And so let's unpack it a little bit into everyday language where, what are other things, like depression is obviously the big one. But for somebody who's just got a 9 to 5 job, and for them it feels like, yeah, I got to work overtime every other day, or weekends are for the job versus myself. What are other symptoms and things that we can start to pay attention to?
So what I think is there's just such a lack of education in this topic. Mental health and mental illness are two different things. So mental health is something every single person has. Like, you've got a mind, you've got mental health, just like our physical health. Like, ideally, we're always at optimal, and that's our healthy stage, but it's a spectrum, just like our physical health. Something's gonna come up. It could be like, it's cold outside, now we have a cold, and then we're a little like stressed out, or we've had this cold for a while and like now it's pneumonia, and like you're like, okay, now I actually have to go see a doctor, and like this is actually like critical, or like it can get worse. And same with our mental health, like there are times where we're fine and we're optimal, but we have a test coming up, or now we've been stuck in this like rut for a really long time. And one, it's figuring out, I think the basic thing of it is like figuring out when that's happening. And so when it's been a while, so it's long lasting, it has a big impact on your life, so it's changing the way you do things, and it changes your emotions. So this is an emotion you haven't really felt before, and once you recognize that, it's reaching out for help, which is really, really hard to do. And that's kind of what I've been like teaching in schools. That's what I've been like talking to the company that I've been working for, Jack.org. This is the basic education we're giving to high school students now. And high school students will go back to their parents. I remember talking about this with my mom, and she's like, well, like this is revolutionary. And having those conversations, like I told my grandmother who's 85 years old, I'm like, you're anxious, like you need a therapist. And she's like, that doesn't make sense. I'm like, well, and you like put it into their own words and go do that. And now I'm just rambling now. I can't remember what we were talking about.
Yeah, and I can build on that, right? Like I think wisdom, the best definition I learned of wisdom is the ability to act on knowledge, or the acting on knowledge. And I think the crisis that we have, especially in the South Asian community, is just a lack of knowledge. And so I feel very privileged to be with you, all of you right now, who have some understanding of what burnout is, but taking a deep dive into it and putting together all of the different diagnostic tools that exist and synthesizing them, I've realized that it's actually quite easy to diagnose when it is that you're going through burnout. The best tool that you can use is one called the 12 Stages of Burnout by Dr. Herbert Freudenberger and Dr. Gail North. What's funny is that they coined the term burnout in the 70s, so it's not even that old. And in fact, when they first started publishing research about burnout, they were getting rejected. People were laughing at them and saying, this is pseudoscience, this isn't even real science. And now here we are in the middle of a full-blown epidemic. I mean, the World Health Organization has called stress the underlying problem of burnout the health epidemic of the 21st century, eh? That's how bad it is. And so there are 12 stages. I'm not going to get all of them right, but it starts off with the compulsion to prove oneself, which I'm sure all of you in the room feel right now. Then you work harder. Then you begin to neglect your needs. You displace conflicts. You display odd behavioral changes. And then it goes all the way. I know I'm missing a few, but then it ends basically with withdrawal, depersonalization, depression, and then burnout syndrome, which is defined as complete physical, mental, and emotional exhaustion. And so when you're experiencing complete physical, mental, and emotional exhaustion, that's the best way to know that you're burned out, when you've sort of lost the will to move on. And having all of these tools at our disposal can give us a shared language to understand when we can look at each other and say, hey, I think you're going through it. I think I'm going through it. And then we can start to make the moves towards recovery and then prevention.
So let's talk about that, because I like the fact that from an old school perspective, your story came out from in a book format. You went to Instagram and started to build that community. What are some of the impact or stories you're hearing back from the community, so we get a sense of how other people are sort of living through this?
I think for me, the first time I put my story out there, I talked to my mom, my story, a lot of it has to do with my family background. My father's an alcoholic. His parents, so my grandparents were very abusive and all of this. And she's like, when you're putting this out there, she's like, you're opening up your family to criticism. Are you okay with hearing that backlash? And I was like, you know what? It's not like I'm lying. I'm not telling anything that's not true. And she's always been like, you tell your truth and that's fine. And so I was like, you know what? Whatever happens, happens. Let's just do this. And so I was mentally prepared to just be met with so much backlash. I'm like, our community, no one's supportive. Everyone's going to talk, they're going to say this, they're going to say that. And then I was like, you know what, whatever, let's just put it out there. And I put it out there, and not a single person said anything bad to me. The only thing I kept on hearing was, oh my God, I've been through this too, or I can relate, or I understand. And a lot of people were like, thank you so much for sharing this. And I was like, honestly, I'm doing this for me. I share my story because talking about it helps me feel better. And it's that give and take. And from the community, that's what I've been hearing, is every time we post a story, I get some new person from across the world being like, you know what, I can relate to this story. Or I'll share a story from a different background, or someone, a guy or a girl or whatever it is. Each person has something, or there's someone out there that can relate. And for me, that's what it came down to at the end of the day. If you make a difference to one person, or you make a difference to 100, it's still a difference in someone else's life.
Yeah, and I find, when you guys and I've started to talk about my life a little bit more, subconsciously we give people permission to now speak to, right? Because, a lot of times, especially being a South Asian kid, who are you going to go to? Your parents have a certain way. You can't go to the uncles and aunts because they support the same belief system, right? And your friends are probably feeling the same thing. So, when you guys open up, it starts to give permission. So how was the reaction to the book?
Wow, that's the reaction to the book was very mixed, and so people were happy that the book was published. But similar to what Jessie was saying, is that my family, their stories are in there. You can read about them. You can read about my mother, my father, mental health in my family over there, mental illness in my family. Sorry, I should make the distinction. They weren't thrilled by that, but I realized that this was an L that I had to take to secure a larger W, which is, they've already made up their minds about mental health, and it's very hard to teach an old dog new tricks, and they're not going to learn. I'm trying to be as optimistic as I can, but I feel like the change needs to happen for my nephews, my nieces, my children, my grandchildren, and the next generation. And so I kind of had to take that initial embarrassment and heat from my family with the understanding that the book would not not help them. It was never meant for them in the first place. Can I touch on something that was actually said earlier? So we've talked a little bit about burnout right now, and we've kind of defined it to some degree, and we've talked about some of the symptoms. Just by a show of hands, how many of you in the room have burned out before? Wow, that's way more than I was expecting. That's almost everyone in the room, right? That's absolutely terrifying. And I wonder how much of this, because when Jessie was describing the reactions that she was getting, I was thinking about, like, just this morning I got a reaction from somebody that I should have been happy to receive that reaction from. That person said, I read your book, and I could really see myself in the story. Now, author me is like fantastic. The book had resonance, but just human Hamza, human me, like, is just like, I wish that wasn't the case. I wish that people didn't relate to the book. I wish that this wasn't a problem in the first place. And I'm not seeing the numbers let up. I'm keeping my eye on those macro trends, and I'm seeing things like competition, alienation, societal pressures, technology, loneliness, the economy continue to exacerbate these numbers. Like, taking the fact that today alone, 1,600 people in China died from overwork. Like 1,600 people today died from overwork in China. That's absolutely bonkers. It's so bonkers that they actually have a word for it that translates to death by overwork. And that's only one region where they have that word. But then you look at other places in South Asia where they have that name as well. I mean, it's just, how much of this comes down to us not feeling like we're enough? How much of this comes down to the performance pressure that we've been taught, that's been almost turned into a system in many ways? Like, how many of us actually feel like we're perfect, we're efficient, we're progressive, we're satisfied, we're innovative? We're never quite gonna feel like we're that. And we know as marketers that our whole job has been to intercept people on these vectors along which they've never felt like they're enough, and then offer whatever. Offer a car, offer a program, offer a book, offer whatever, and say, this is the solution, buy our thing. I think the problem's a lot deeper. I think the problem that we have to really target is, what is it going to take for us to feel like we're enough so that we can avoid burnout altogether? But maybe I'm just being too optimistic.
No, I think it's a great point, because part of it, and which is a great segue into my next question or comment, is, I've got 2 little kids, and they're going to be in the school system for the next, 20 years or whatever, and we teach them a lot of academic stuff. How to be somebody, how to be an accountant, how to be an engineer, how to be a doctor, how to be a business person. But nowhere in that journey do we teach them how to be themselves. How to cope, how to handle knockdowns, how to handle social media. The schools, like my daughter wanted a cell phone. I'm like, cool, here's a cell phone, but there's no SIM card. So he can only be functional when you're on Wi-Fi. School has Wi-Fi. But the school says no phones in class. These kids can't wait to get out of class because they're no longer focused on what they're learning is how fast will the bell ring so I get to my locker, get my phone for 5 minutes before the next class starts. Lunch, she's on it. And she doesn't know, hopefully she won't watch this recording, but I've got her account synced to my Google Photos. So every picture, every video, it just comes into my feed, and I'm watching the timestamps on these things. But while this, the education system has been really good at getting ready people for a work or a career, they haven't focused on how to become you and be happy. Does that make sense?
There's 2 things right there that you touched on. I think, having worked in marketing, specifically social media marketing and digital marketing, the one thing I've realized that is almost sinister, what these companies have done, is they've hijacked our limbic systems. And I'm going to get this wrong, but your limbic system is responsible for sensory arousal, for memory, and one more thing. But basically, like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, Pinterest, Tinder, whatever, you name it, has done a great job of just taking our attention and said that this is the new thing that you depend on to feel like you're enough. You need to see your likes cross double digits, or now triple digits in this case. You need to have more than 500 followers to feel like you even exist, so on and so forth. People need to see your stories and engage with your stories for your stories to be fire in the first place. It's absolutely frightening what's happening over there. And, I think like that could be a whole other talk, and I'm going to get carried away, so I'm going to pass it on to Jessie.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of it comes down to education at the end of the day. Is social media is a whole new space that I grew up in the age of, I didn't have internet for the first, I would say 6 or 7 years of my life. And then I suddenly had internet, but it was really, really bad. And then now I'm like, oh my God, internet. And I can't live without my phone. But just because I've seen kind of both sides of things, I remember what it was like to not be on my phone all the time. So when I see my sister who's 15 and she's only grown up with this, I'm like, oh, okay, how do we live our lives? And how is that different? And so I think it is about educating yourselves and the people around us. In the school system, I think needs to change drastically. teaching them how to be workers. We're not teaching them how to be human. At the end of the day, I don't know what the quadratic equation is. Like, I've never used it in my life. I know, it's sort of shocking. But there are things that I remember, like for me, I tell all of my like friends, I tell all of like the people who are younger than me, I'm like, go to university. And I'm like, your degree is useless. Your degree is absolutely useless. But go to university, because being in school, being surrounded by people, actually having those interactions, failing your first class, all of that's going to teach you stuff. It's not the school itself, like unless you're a doctor or engineer or whatever. But yeah, I think the school system needs to change and figure that out.
And I'd love to add to that, like this can't be it. Like our economic utility can't be the only way that we articulate and define our self-worth. Like our ability to be productive in a capitalist economy cannot be the only way that we get to say we're enough, because that's a losing battle. We're never going to win that, especially on the precipice of this AI revolution that's supposedly going to render 70% of all jobs completely changed by the year 2030, according to McKinsey. Like, how are you going to compete against robots? We're just going to lose that battle. And so, Satish, you and I were having a talk at the bar right now where you were talking about creating a mechanism of ownership, of owning South Asian content, owning South Asian media, building a platform for us where we can now look to the generations that have come before us. We can look to communities that have built institutional wealth, that have built generational wealth. And I think they've got the right idea of what enough is, where they don't have to work as hard as our parents did for the money that they've made, and their money is now working for them. And I think that will free up our capacity to then focus on leading more well-rounded lives.
Yeah, and I think everybody in this room will agree, we can play a very small part starting tomorrow in just changing the way we deal with each other, right? Like, the likes are not as important as a phone call from somebody saying, hey, how's it going? A text message versus a actual invitation. When's the last time you'd written a hand thank you note to somebody versus, this digital stuff we're doing? And I feel like for me anyways, when I went through this stuff, so quick to share with you guys too. So I spent my first 14 years in Singapore. Okay, I was born in India, grew up in Singapore, and I was the dumbest kid, period. And according to academic standards. And it wasn't just a parental thing. At 12, you do a nationwide test. And depending on your academic score in Singapore, you're either put into the blue collar role or the white collar role. And that's the rest of your life. Okay? So here's a 13-year-old kid. My dad's an engineer, left India for a better life. Everything that he wanted him to be that he couldn't do, he's put that on my head now to go, okay, you're my first son. Of course, I have a brother who's super smart, got all the PhDs and the masters and all this crazy stuff. He literally got 99% in every course the year after that I took. Just very sad. But so for the first 14 years of my life, I was consistently reminded I'm dumb, I'm stupid, I won't be good for anything in life. And so I was depressed without knowing I was depressed. I just knew this is how I felt all the time, like weird and out of shell and whatever. And then we got on a plane, come to Singapore. I go to Malvern, Scarborough, greatest place on planet for me. All the diversity that you could get fed on one plate was there. I joined the basketball team. 3 months later, I'm in drama class. And now there's a whole new version of me. People are saying, oh, you're great in sports. You got charisma. You're smart. I'm like, wait, are we talking about the same kid? Because literally 6 months ago when I was in Singapore, it was a whole different label. It was a soul that I was used to. And that's how quickly I started to question everything in life. And for me, that led to an incredible life of entrepreneurship and success. But we chatted earlier, this pain that we start with leads to some decision. Mine was to become an entrepreneur, but everybody that celebrates the successes I've had are looking at the outcome, while the starting point is very dark and painful. But my first step was to just question everything about my belief system. Because smart people told me I'm dumb, smart people said I'm charismatic, so who's right? So from your perspective, if you get this feeling of something doesn't feel right, I don't know what it is, depression, anxiety, what is like the first smallest thing somebody can do like tomorrow morning?
So yeah, I came from like a very similar mindset of something was wrong and I didn't know. And then when I look back, I'm like, without this experience, I never would have been doing what I'm doing now. And for me, one of the smallest things we can change is when someone says, how are you? Just be honest. Like, the amount, my like nickname when I was growing up still is, was I'm fine. They're like, oh, fine's here. Because regardless of what the question was, I would say I'm fine. They're like, do you want juice? I'm fine. Do you want roti? I'm fine. Do you want, like, are you okay? I'm fine. And like, they were just like, oh, is there any, like, are you just always fine? I'm like, yeah, I'm fine. And it was so irritating to the people around me. They're like, okay, we're just not gonna ask her anymore. And eventually people stopped asking. And that was because I didn't want them to ask. I didn't want to talk about what was really going on. And so one thing that I started changing was when people would ask me how I'm doing, I would just be honest. And I would be like, you know what, I'm okay today. I'm like, you know what, I'm not really feeling great today. And for you as a person, genuinely ask. Like, you can tell when people are like, I'm fine. You're like, are you really? Like, what's going on? And like, have that conversation and be like, okay, even if you are, like, let me know, like, I'm here to talk. And it's just opening that up. But I think a lot of people also, we're always looking at the outcome. Like, for me, I'm like, I always get people be like, oh my God, you go and do these panels, you go and do this, you're traveling the world. They're like, that's so cool. I'm like, yeah, I was also depressed and like really anxious for 20 years of my life. Like, it's not great. Like, it's fun now, but it's like thinking about that and like just seeing where other people come from. And it's all about, I think at the end of the day, just being compassionate and being human, which we don't really teach anymore.
No, I like that a lot, because I try to teach my kids that, and people that I mentor. It's a simple question, how are you? And it's one of the hardest things to answer for some reason. You know, we get into this alter personality to be this person. Like, I'm great, look at my Instagram, look at my story. So simply just being honest with somebody opens up an incredible opportunity. That's fantastic.
And sometimes it's that positive self-talk, which can sometimes come across as like overconfident self-talk, will actually smear how mentally ill you actually are at that point, how depressed you are. I know as somebody who's been through depression a couple of times, that by the time I've reached the point of depression, it has been actually months. And by the time I've actually self-diagnosed that I've burned out, it has been weeks, if not months, that I've burned out. So it's usually too late by the time that you're able to figure it out. So I would do exactly what Jessie suggested, which is have people in your life that can serve almost like Voldemort's Horcruxes, if you will. For all the Harry Potter fans, you know what I'm talking about, right? Like, he split his soul into 7 parts and distributed them across the known wizarding universe, and they live there as sort of repositories for his soul. So similarly, I have a few people in my life that they're responsible for knowing when I'm off balance. And these are people who I've told, like, hey, you can keep it all the way real with me. Like, don't worry about anything. Just kick my ass, look me in the eyes and tell me, hey, you're not okay. Like, I need those people in my life. Otherwise, I'm never going to hear it. And the one thing that I've systemized is journaling, which is so funny. Now that I'm thinking about it out loud, I'm like, how did this kid who grew up in Scarborough, who used to rap over 50-cent beats, suddenly start journaling, man? Some of my friends till today are like, what, mans are journaling now? Yeah, eh? But journaling has been a lifesaver for me, man. Like, I journal for 5 minutes a day, 3 minutes at the start of the day, 2 minutes at the end, and I basically write out, you know, what I hope will go well today, what went well today, what my intention is for tomorrow. And that's a great diagnostic tool that you can refer to day in and day out that'll give you a good sense of where your mental health is at.
Yeah, similar to you guys, I had a couple of smaller burnouts, fainted and all this kind of stuff, but I always was like, get up, let's go again, get up, let's go again. I started an agency 12 years ago, and I wanted to become the first South Asian CEO in the mainstream industry. It was all 50, 60 years old of, you know, mainstream industry, and I was like, why isn't there anybody in the industry that could be creative and a CEO? Why are we all back in the IT room and being tech guys that get called up? So that's what I spent 12 years doing. And we went from 0 to 60 people, sold millions of clients, worked at all of the Fortune 100 and 200s. But halfway along, as we got into a certain size, the reason I started the company, which was to be creative, was no longer my job. I was now the glorified sales guy, the CEO, go out and get more deals, win another RFP. And I kept ignoring all the signs until one day my body just started to shut down, like physical issues. There was a tumor scare, operation stuff, and I was like, what the hell am I doing? And I started to make a list of just things that are no longer making me happy. I don't care what it is, food, clothes, people, and I spent the next year cutting everything out, including restructuring the company, a very profitable company, to sell it because I wasn't happy anymore in it. And it's funny because after I sold the company, everybody was like, oh, entrepreneur sold the company, success story. I'm like, I didn't sell it for those reasons. Sold it because it was no longer making me happy. I'm not happy. I'm ignoring burnouts, and it's the same cycle after year after year after year. So now, if it doesn't make me happy, I say no and I go the other way. And funny enough, life is a lot more profitable and is a lot more happy right now. So thank you guys for sharing your story, first of all. Please give me a big round of applause. And let's open it up to see if we got some audience questions, if you have any. Or we can do a group hug, too. I'm totally fine with group hugs. Bobby.
You could probably hear me from there anyway, but so I understand the whole concept of burnout and slowing down, but I'm also all about pushing beyond your limits. So I'm kind of talking about the opposite side of things. So then, how do you counteract pushing beyond your limits with mental health? Because the reason why I say that, because I listen to a lot of motivational speakers, like Eric Thomas talks about, I'll sleep when I'm dead. Or listen, I'll get on a flight and I'll go to church and all this, and I'm up at 3 a.m. and I'll outwork you any day. So then how do you counteract that kind of stuff? People who are apparently champions in this whole thing.
So I think at the end of the day, that's not sustainable, is what it comes down to. You can have periods. 2 weeks ago, I was in New York. I got to New York on Friday. Every single day I was in New York, I would get up at 6 a.m., I would get hair and makeup done, whatever, go do my day, do all of my shoots, whatever I needed to do, go to dinner. I still wanted to hang out with my New York friends, so we'd go out, we'd party, whatever we wanted to do. Come home at 2 or 3 in the morning, wake up at 6 a.m., do it all over again. And I did that for 4 or 5 days. And then I flew home for 36 hours to Toronto, got flown back out to New York to go host an event in Times Square, was in New York for 36 hours. And I had that 2 weeks of I was pushing beyond my limits. And I'm burning out, oh my God. And you can have that for a short period of time, but it's gonna come and bite you back. So it's a conscious decision to be you know what? Maybe this is my short little time period where I am gonna push myself. I'm gonna move forward and I'm gonna do what I need to do. I'm gonna work those long hours to make sure that I get the job or make sure I get that client or whatever it is. But you have to take that time afterwards. Be okay, I pushed through that, I did it. Now I need to take a step back. So what I did was I came back, went to work the next day, and then I told my boss, I'm you know what, I'm working from home for the next 2 days because I'm tired, and I just need to work in my bed. And then for the weekend, I called all of my friends, and like I said before, I was guys, don't let me leave the house. Tell me to stay in the room. And my friends are okay. And then I would call them and be can I leave the house now? And they're no, Jessie, go to bed. I'm okay, fine. And you have to take care of yourself. So definitely push yourself. And I think there's also a difference between being uncomfortable and being unsafe. It's okay to be uncomfortable. If you're pushing yourself and you're oh, this isn't great, but that's fine. But there's a point where it becomes unsafe for you physically, for you mentally. And so it's just being cognizant, and the more you check in with yourself, if you make it a job every single day, be journaling, the first 3 minutes of the day, last 5 minutes of the day, whatever that is, and you're I'm gonna check in and be okay, how do I feel right now? And you can gauge, you're you know what, am I at optimal health? Am I a little stressed out? Am I really, really struggling right now and I need to do something about it?
And I think you've also got to be hypercritical of these influencers, myself included, right? Jessie herself included. I've been, I would say, as inactive as I've possibly been in my entire social media career this year alone. I think the last Instagram post I did was a few months ago, which is, I know, not that long ago, but in social media influencer time, that's a lifetime. That's 20 years basically, right? So, for example, a good example is The Rock, right? If you follow The Rock on Instagram, you're never going to feel like you're productive. This guy's always up earlier than you, always working out harder than you, always taking more meetings than you. He's doing what you want to do to the max. You have to look into that. The Rock has way more permission space than the average person. He's got a system, he's got a team, he's got the resources. He doesn't have to expend the mental fatigue and make the amount of decisions that we have to make in order to live that lifestyle. It's also commensurate with his work. So he has to look that way for his work. He has to appear that way for his work. So it's in his best interest to keep on marketing and perpetuating this myth that he's hyper-productive. It's so interesting. When I started researching what social media influence was, this was a couple of years ago, the first wave of influencers were what we would categorize as the leisure class. We would look at them and be what do you do for a living? I don't actually know what you do. You're always traveling, you're on a yacht in Dubai, you're on a beach somewhere, you're having these wonderfully colorful smoothie bowls. What the fuck do you do for a living? And then what has happened recently, though, is we've now seen the inverse of that, which is, I wouldn't even call it hyper-productive. I'd call it like grossly, extremely productive. The Gary V's of the world, the Kevin Harts of the world, the Rocks of the world. It's in the same category, which is like creating this distance between the average person and them as the influencer. And you have to ask the question of like, well, how are they benefiting from telling this story? So I would encourage everyone to be hypercritical of those narratives that are being perpetuated online.
Yeah, and just to close up on that one, I found if you had a real goal and a purpose, it's easier to work really, really hard because you know when you're gonna hit it. And then you can decide at that point, okay, I'm gonna take a break or what happens. If when you don't have that goal, you're just grinding without knowing why we're grinding. Does that make sense? Great question, Bobby.
Like a simple example would be like scenario A, if you know that your push-up maximum is 10 push-ups per session. If you do one set of push-ups, you do 10, and then it takes you 2 days to recover, and then you do another 10, and then you're done for the week. At the end of the week, you've only done 20 push-ups. But if you do just under your max, if you do what's productively, like if you find your right altitude, productive anxiety, you do 5 push-ups a day. Scenario B, guess at the end of the week which scenario has done more push-ups. Scenario B, 25 versus 20. So I think it's about doing just enough. And I think we go back to that word time and again, like what is enough for you? What is enough for the people that you love? What is enough for the work that you're involved in? And I think the sooner we can all figure that out for ourselves, the more productive and healthy we'll be. Can I? Oh, sorry.
I don't need the mic, do I? Yeah. But and as you spoke about anxiety and depression from an individual standpoint, but I mean it's really, I think, like you alluded to, a cultural or systemic issue. So for people in positions of power, I guess, like whether you're a manager, a lawmaker, or even a parent, like what are things you can do from a higher level to address these issues?
I'm a big believer in just opening up the conversation. I think as like a manager, like for me, what made a big difference was my like one-on-one meetings. We have 10 minutes of like friendship time, and it's super cheesy. And I used to hate it. I would go in and be like, Jason, this is so weird. But really it was time where he would be like, yeah, so this is what's going on in my day. And then he's like, so what about yours? And I would like reluctantly tell him what was going on my weekend. And then when it came to a time where I was like feeling burnt out, I had kind of that rapport there and I felt comfortable. And he would open up too. He's like, you know what? I didn't have a great weekend. I felt really sick, so I stayed home. I did this. And it's giving that permission to talk about it. And I think especially in the workplace, I used to work in like the financial district doing recruitment, which I'm pretty sure I would wake up at like 5 a.m. every single day. I would get to work for 7:30. I would work until 6:30. Then I would commute home, which was an hour and a half. So I wouldn't eat dinner until like 9 p.m. And then I'd have like other work to do because I had all my side hustles. And so I, again, was just doing ridiculous amounts of hours. And I never felt like I was allowed to talk about it, and I never felt like I could tell anyone. And we just didn't have that culture at work where everyone was like, you either are burnt out and then you take your sick time, or you just deal with it. And I think now a lot of workplaces, especially like the big consulting firms like Deloitte is really big on this. They tell you like it's okay to take a mental health day. Like your mental health is just as important as your physical health. If you're not feeling well mentally, you can't do what you want in the workplace. So why, like, you don't need to be here if you can't be productive. And it's just opening up those channels of communication.
I think you asked a great question. I think that the organization has a huge responsibility when it comes to the well-being of their employees. And I think that all too often, the management layer and the executive layer tends to shirk that duty. If you haven't had a one-on-one with your boss, and I'd say over a month, that's a red flag for you. That means that you're in a potentially hazardous, toxic work environment where your manager is just being grossly irresponsible. And I think there's 3 themes that a manager should focus on, which is like discipline in your work. So are you able to separate urgent from important? Are you on top of your to-do list? Is your work more reactive than it is proactive? And then I think tranquility, to echo your sentiments over there, which is like, tell me about your personal life without going into too many details. Only share what you're comfortable sharing, but just let me know that everything's okay. Is there something that I should know about? Is there a dependent that is ill? Are you ill? Is there financial troubles? Like, let me know what's happening exogenously that might be affecting your work over here. And then the last one I would say is just focus on the mission. And I think that more and more research is coming out. I read a study from Deloitte recently that said that, I'm going to get the numbers wrong, but basically the connection being made over here was that especially millennial generations find more reward and more intrinsic value and valence in a company that has defined a clear mission and keeps on re-articulating that mission than a promotion. So they care more about connection to a company's vision and mission more than a promotion and the money that they're making, which I find very surprising, but it's starting to make a lot of sense. So I think that if you are focusing on those three themes over and over again, discipline, tranquility, and focus, I think that could go a long way towards recognizing burnout early on and then preventing it in the long run.
Hi, so I just had a question in terms of when we talk about mental health and mental illness, we see two very generic approaches towards the solutions of it. So one is the psychiatric treatment way with the medications, and one is the psychology way of therapy and talking to people and opening up yourself. So in your experiences, what have you felt has worked better for you guys? Because is it a combination of both, or is it something which has been more successful for you and the other has not worked?
Great question. I feel wholly unqualified to answer this. So.
Thanks, Hamza. I'll just do it. But I think at the end of the day, mental health is so individualistic that the solution is individualistic, and that's why we haven't been able to tackle this. There is no Band-Aid solution. I can't be like, these are my symptoms, give me a medication and it'll go away. You can't do that, because depending on how your brain works, depending on what you've been through, like your upbringing, like or whatever it is, everything is different. So it's honestly just complete trial and error, and that sucks. It's like I feel so bad every time. It's like, so you're doing better, like how'd you do it? And I'm like, honestly, like I can't tell you, because I just like tried a bunch of things and then I was like, this combination of these 17 things works for me. And so for like, I say always, like the first step is go to your doctor and be like, okay, this is what I'm going through. What should I do? And for me, like I tried medication. It took me 7 medications before I found the one that actually worked for me. And then I was like really, really sick. And then it gave me like suicidal thoughts and all of this. And then I was like, okay, this isn't working. And then I went to therapy, and my therapist I was like having boyfriend troubles at the time. And they're like, just go talk to your mom. I'm like, yeah, my brown mother's gonna love that. And like that didn't work. And so like, therapy is not my thing because they don't understand my culture. And like, it was trying a bunch of things until I was like, you know what works for me is talking to my friends about it. Sometimes I do need the medication when like I'm really, really at a low. Thankfully, I've gotten to a point where I am kind of leveled and I recognize it early on and I can get through that. But at the end of the day, it is so individualistic. It's just having that courage to keep trying, because it's hard. It's hard to try 10 different things and none of them work, and you're like, why am I still trying? And that's why this is such a hard space to be in. And that's what I tell everyone around me, is just like keep going for it. Like something will work. It's just going to take time, and unfortunately, you can't put a pin on how long it's going to take or how short it's going to be.
Yeah, just to add to that, which is from my own personal experience, I mean, dealing with this stuff from a very long age, I've started to focus on what triggers it more than how to solve it, because I realize nothing fully gets it out of my system. So I've started to just figure, okay, what are these 5 or 6 things where the minute one of those triggers, I can already feel the domino effect. And now I've got my own process of going, okay, if this triggers, do this right away. You know, I'm gonna go watch this particular movie because it's gonna change my state of mind. I'm gonna read this book, or I'm gonna watch this picture, because that's the only other way to sort of, put it down once it starts to come up. So. Yeah,
no, I completely agree. At the end of the day, I think one of the things, like we were talking about before, I always used to think my mental illness was a really, really bad thing. Like I was like, I'm just surviving and living life with this mental illness. And then last October, I had the opportunity, I was flown to London and I got to have mental health conversations. Literally, I was in a room like this, and like the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, so Will and Kate were sitting right there, and like they're listening to me, and I was like, I don't know what's going on. I'm like, I don't know what my life is. And I went back to my hotel room, had a glass of wine, and I was like, what did I do today? And I was like, today I talked to Will and Kate. And I was like, why did I talk to Will and Kate? Like, I'm having this internal conversation. I'm like, I talked to Will and Kate about mental health, and the only reason I had this conversation is because I went through years of depression, anxiety, whatever it is. Am I still depressed? Do I still have anxiety? Yes, I still have those things, but I've learned how to deal with them, and I've used them to my advantage. And changing your perspective, figuring out what triggers you, and how you can live your life. There are people who don't have their mental illness forever. It could be situational. For me, a lot of it is just this is how my brain chemistry is, so I can't change that. And depending on what it is, you figure out what those triggers are, how that works in your brain, and then you go from there and you figure it out.
Question, if you don't mind. So actually, my question is for something that you said earlier, Satish. You were like, yeah, to you actually, yeah. No, well, I think some folks in the audience might appreciate this. Like a theme that came up naturally in this conversation is one around like entrepreneurship and sort of ownership and being in control. And I wonder if that's a pressure that's being felt right now in 2019. I think that entrepreneurship has certainly been lionized. And that we look to entrepreneurship as this exit, like having multiple gigs and controlling your own destiny. But I wonder how much of that is true. Is that the answer? Like, I guess, sorry, my roundabout way of asking this question, like, is it possible to reach career happiness without being your own boss? And this will lead to burnout.
Yeah, so it's a great question, because I've never had a job. I've always created my own companies. And so for me, as I started to mentor people and some of them had jobs, I still don't understand what the word entrepreneur means, to be honest, because either you own a business or you don't. And for me, everybody's a business owner, even if you're just in business for yourself. Entrepreneurship for me is a character, like this idea of I'm going to break my own rules to create something out of nothing, right? Because I'm not falling in line with an infrastructure. I'm not going to work for somebody else's process. I'm going to create my own economy, customers, etc. And it's hard to sometimes sit and listen to students who are taking it, talk about it. You know, I'm in entrepreneur class. At the end of it, I'm going to have a business, and I'm going to. So for me, I think, whether you have a job or you're starting your own company, it's really going back to identifying why you're doing it. If you're starting your own startup and your startup is solving a real problem, a real passion that you want to take to the world and solve, then it's a different lens, and you can achieve happiness because you're working for something bigger than the dollar or the customer or the market. Same thing with a job. You can go to get a job anywhere. But what about finding a job where you align the values of the company to your values, where overtime is not time after 5, but the extra effort to achieve a goal, right? And I think that's what's really missing, because we're not looking at sort of the real purpose of why we get up and go to work, right? And that's where I find a lot of the first hurdles happen. The statistics of 40% or 50% of the companies fail. They don't fail because there's no market. They fail because the founders lost their passion because they don't know why they got into it at the beginning. So you get enough road bumps, you're gonna get a flat, and you know what to do with it, right? So I think totally, whether you're starting your own business or working for somebody, there's success and happiness in both. But you still gotta start with, well, what am I doing here? And how am I adding value? And do I feel good with the value that I'm adding? And if those things are yes, 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 get up, let's do this. Thank you. Any other questions? They'll be out mingling for a little bit. We've got a couple of books to give away, so I'm gonna do a pop quiz. One, who knows Jessie's favorite addiction? She said it. So she's getting the books.
Congratulations.
This one might be a little bit tricky, so just scream it out because she already changed the rules. Where is Hamza from? Malvern. Good guys. Thank you so much for coming tonight. Really appreciate everybody coming out. This will be a series of events we're gonna do. I run a music festival called Desi Fest, and we have something similar on June 7th right here called Face the Music. All of the artists that are performing, they're gonna come, they're gonna hang out, we're gonna talk to them about what it's like to be a musician, how do you build a music business, do you even have a music business, or we're just making content, what are some of their stress and some of their burnouts, especially in the South Asian community where the minute you're an artist, your parents hate you, but every wedding needs an artist to perform, so it's kind of weird. But we're gonna talk about all that, so look out for the flyers and invitation for June 7th right here. Thank you guys so much for coming and sharing your story. You've given more people permission to explore their own concerns and questions. They're available online, look them up, they're super friendly. He might take a little bit longer to get back to you on Instagram, but I'm sure email is gonna be great for him. Shout out to our team, video crew back there, Susan, Bobby, and let's go have some drinks. Thank you again for coming.